Hello and welcome to Mastering Web and Infrastructure Reconnaissance, which leads us to the core of our class. I want to teach you in exhaustive detail how to conduct reconnaissance for a couple of purposes. If you're doing penetration testing, I want to make sure that you have uncovered all the information, i.e. the targets, the hosts, the IP addresses, the services, anything else that you need for a thorough test. For blue teaming, I want to help you understand how to assess your own organization so that you can understand what attackers are seeing and start to secure some of those things. And if you're a threat hunter, I want to help you gain insight into some of the normal scenarios on the internet. What are the typical services that are out there so that you can more easily classify false positives versus real attacks. And for IT generalists, I want to help you just understand how systems are built so that you can go do better troubleshooting. In order to make this all happen, I've laid out a very broad class outline. In section 1, we'll go through an introduction to the course and setting up some tools. So we'll install some virtual machines, both in an investigation platform and an attack platform. Also some virtual machines for targets that you can do reconnaissance on across your local network. In section 2, we will look at all the ways that we can find information using Google and a simple web browser. We call this OSINT, or open source intelligence. A lot of people don't know, but Google has this thing called advanced operators that helps you identify things like finding particular file types or finding particular URLs. In section 3, we focus on using LinkedIn, which is a social networking site for professionals, to find people, right, so individual employees, finding locations, so say locations of data centers, locations of security teams, and particular technologies. So understanding if a target organization has databases or what kind of network they have and what kind of skills do the people that they employ have. In section 4, we will use both active and passive methods to look at the domain name service and mine some of the information that it holds. If you think of DNS as just a large database, not all of that database is exposed to people unless you query for the right items. For section 5, we'll start exploring network blocks, individual IP addresses inside of those network blocks, and services running on those servers. We'll start fingerprinting with Nmap. Section 6 is a deep dive into web applications and what they're built with. We'll also start to get more active with discovery tools and start some simple vulnerability scanning. Section 7 is a sort of expose on some of the newer web servers and some of their quirks and individualities, and we'll explore Memcache a little bit. And that brings us to Section 8, which is all about scanning internal networks. We'll take what we know about networks and services and apply it to a local network with a couple of twists. We'll also take Metasploit out for a spin and do some vulnerability scanning with it. I've taken extra care to build out some depth for each of the sections so that even if you've been doing IT security for a while, you'll still learn something in each section that you didn't know before. Even something as simple as querying network blocks using a variety of tools can start to show you additional data that most people wouldn't think to look for. That leads us to our course goals. When I designed this course, I took the approach of teaching basic skills and then a progression to mastery in some deep topics. But what I really want to do is cater to two different audiences. If you're new, I want to give you more skills than I had when I started out, i.e. there's a specialization in IT. We have application developers, we have server administrators, we have network administrators. And for the most part, folks specialize inside of one of those areas and don't know the other two people's jobs. But in security, we have to be able to understand all three jobs and then a security layer over the top of it. And that gets very difficult. So what I'm trying to help you do is to build a bridge between all of these different knowledge areas. And if you're experienced, I want to add new skills to your toolbox and give you a little bit more depth in things that you do know and help you to become a master of those things. For prerequisites, you obviously need a computer and an internet connection. That's given. You probably wouldn't be interested in this if you didn't have those. The minimum specifications for your computer and your internet are a little bit fuzzy. You can use the minimum specifications that I have here, but things will take longer and it definitely won't be as comfortable to use. We will go through the steps to install Kali Linux in a virtual machine. Kali Linux is kind of a standard for penetration testing. You probably have already gotten exposure to it. This will give you the basic set of tools that you need. But the secret is you don't really need Kali for all of the techniques. A couple things when you start getting into more active tools, it pays to have Kali available, mostly because you can transition from doing reconnaissance into actually more active things like using exploits, and it's a lot easier if you have all the tools in the same platform. You could, however, for the reconnaissance pieces, install an operating system or just download the tools and install them separately. That's completely your option. Okay, so for example, some things like Nmap, traceroute, whois, those are common tools inside of operating systems. They just come with those. If you don't have access to them, you can just very easily download them. You can even set up your own remote server if you really want to, and just install a Linux on an IaaS cloud or an infrastructure as a service cloud, and then just SSH into that machine and use that to conduct your reconnaissance. For a base operating system or a host operating system for virtual machines, I just use Ubuntu. That's my default install for anything that I need a desktop for. But honestly, you could use any kind of Linux, you could use Windows, you could use Mac. It doesn't really matter as long as you have access to either VirtualBox or VMware, and you can build virtual machines on top of it. However, for a minimum Kali install, you need at least one processor, 1 gig of RAM, and 20 gigs of hard drive space. You really, in order to be comfortable, you need probably about twice that just to have a responsive system. And then on top of that, we're going to run at least 2 different virtual machines for internal targets. So you at least have to be able to run Kali and one of these additional targets at the same time. I do have one caveat or warning for you, and that involves legality. Some of the techniques and tools that I teach you are illegal in some jurisdictions. Definitely not the majority of them by far. Most of the things I teach you are just a step above network troubleshooting. It's really what you do with the results that you get. But once you get out of the passive tools, and by passive tools, I mean they don't actively query, they don't do any kind of vulnerability scanning. And once you get past those passive tools and get into active tools, and by active tools, I mean things that are above Nmap. So they actively make connections to the target machine. So that runs into vulnerability scanners. It runs into things like Metasploit that actually have exploits on them for vulnerabilities. Then you start to run into problems. So, and it depends on your jurisdiction. So in Germany, the UK, and Australia, those countries in particular have made the possession of hacking tools illegal. Now, there's a lot of gray area there, like what's a hacking tool, what's not a hacking tool, what's a dual purpose tool. So for example, Nmap it's a network scanner, but it just detects ports that are open. So you can use it as a system administrator to test to see which things are blocked by your firewall. Or you could use it as a penetration tester to see which ports are open that you could attack. So it's kind of a dual use technology. The key here is you have to understand your local law, and it's best if you don't use any kind of active methods on targets that you don't own. That's why we're going to go through the process to build some of those targets. And having said that, let's go get into some learning.